Alright, let's hop into an alternate universe. No, alternate world, right? And you could say universe as well, but let's hop into an alternate universe world thing. And this alternate universe world thing is the exact same to our world, except one factor is missing. And that factor is The Legend of Zelda never existed. There's no Link, no Zelda, no Master Sword. Just an empty void where one of gaming's most legendary franchises should be. Kind of weird to think about, right? Well, today I'm going to try and answer questions about how games would have progressed and a lot more of what if Zelda never existed. So let's dive into this alternate timeline and find out. So, to truly understand it, let's go all the way back to 1986. The Legend of Zelda dropped and absolutely changed the game. Literally, it introduced players to massive worlds that encouraged exploration, puzzle solving, and dungeon crawling. If Zelda never happened, what would have filled that game? For starters, the whole Metroidvania genre might have taken longer to develop. Games like Metroid and Castlevania borrowed ideas from Zelda's open-ended design. Without that inspiration, these games could have stayed more linear for way longer. Metroid, for example, built its world around backtracking and unlocking new abilities to access previously unreachable areas, concepts that were directly influenced by Zelda. Imagine a Metroid game without its tense sense of progression through exploration. This genre's focus on interconnected worlds and sense of discovery would later shape games like Hollow Knight and Dead Cells. Meanwhile, RPGs like Final Fantasy and Dragon Quest might have doubled down on the turn-based combat instead of experimenting with action elements. Zelda was one of the first games to mix real-time combat with puzzle solvings in an adventure game. This paved the way for Secrets of Mana in 1993, where action combat was fully integrated into the RPG experience. If Zelda hadn't pioneered this approach, it's possible that the action RPG genre could have been delayed until 1991 or even later. And let's not forget the Final Fantasy VI ATB system might have remained the norm, instead of inspiring real-time combat systems seen in games like Chrono Trigger. Let's talk about Western RPGs for a second. Without Zelda, early PC games like Ultima and King's Quest could have continued to lead the way in that genre. These games were more about text-based storytelling and puzzles, but Zelda pushed the envelope by making action a core part of that experience. Ultima 7, for instance, is a classic, but without the influence of Zelda, it may have stayed more rooted in a grid-based, turn-based system. Even King's Quest, which initially focused on puzzle solvings, would have had to stay with this static story-driven formula. Imagine games like Baldur's Gate or Diablo, both of which combined RPG elements with real-time combat, never getting the chance to explore their hybrid gameplay styles. Matter of fact, RPGs might have evolved entirely different without Zelda. Let's fast forward to 1998, when The Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time dropped and changed 3D gaming forever. It introduced Z-targeting, a revolutionary combat system that made 3D battles feel smooth and intuitive. But without it, how would 3D combat evolve? Lock-on 3D games, something used in Devil May Cry, Dark Souls, and Grand Theft Auto 3, could have taken years to develop. Imagine playing Dark Souls without a lock-on system. The game's already hard enough, like, come on now. The innovation that Zelda brought to 3D combat, making fights in vast three-dimensional spaces feel so precise and deliberate. It was groundbreaking. Without this mechanic, games like Devil May Cry might not have such a fluid combat. Instead, they could have been stuck with clunkier, less intuitive systems. Dark Souls, which perfected the lock-on and close-quarters combat, could have been an entirely different game, maybe even less influential in shaping the modern RPG combat system. Other action-adventure games like Kingdom Hearts and Beyond Good and Evil might have looked totally different. Nintendo might have leaned harder into platformers instead of refining action-adventure mechanics. Imagine Kingdom Hearts without the ability to lock onto enemies and engage in a fluid real-time combat. Beyond Good and Evil took inspiration from Zelda's sense of exploration, but it also benefited from refining 3D combat mechanics that were honed thanks to Zelda's influence. Without Zelda, Kingdom Hearts might have had a much slower turn-based battling system, or could even have leaned more heavier on the static RPG-style combat seen in earlier Final Fantasy titles. And games like Shadow of the Colossus and The Elder Scrolls III Morrowind might have lacked the emphasis on open-ended exploration. Morrowind was one of the first RPGs to offer such an immersive world. Much of that was inspired by Zelda's non-linear exploration. Without Zelda, the Elder Scrolls franchise might have remained a more traditional, linear experience without the deep freedom it is known for today. The Shadows of Colossus, a game that has used the environment itself as part of its storytelling, likely wouldn't have had the same impact on the gaming world without Zelda's influence on environmental storytelling. Let's fast forward again to the open world revolution, we'll call it. One of the big Zelda games that came out with that was Breath of the Wild. Breath of the Wild redefined open world gaming, giving us freedom like never before. But without Zelda, how would open world games develop? First, imagine the Assassin's Creed franchise. Without Zelda's influence on world building and exploration, instead of its seamless free-roaming gameplay, we could have seen a game much more focused on linear missions and combat challenges, like Prince of Persia. Open-world games like Far Cry and Watch Dogs might have leaned much more heavily on mission-based structures, with fewer opportunities for player-driven discovery. The idea of stumbling upon a cool new area just by wandering about. That likely wouldn't have been as widespread as it is today. Then we have Elden Ring. Its open-ended world and figured-out-yourself approach that has Zelda's DNA all over it. Without that influence, Elden Ring could have just been another waypoint-heavy RPG with a linear progression, rather than a sprawling, mysterious world that allows players to make their own paths. The game's secretive, exploration-driven design, where players feel rewarded for the curiosity, might have never emerged without Zelda, showing how crucial it is to let players roam freely. Even games like Horizon Zero Dawn and The Witcher 3 cues from Zelda's sense of world design. The way you approach tasks and quests in these games, finding hidden locations or solving environmental puzzles, was directly inspired by Zelda's core mechanics. The Witcher 3, for instance, became known for its narrative depth, but also its sense of discovery. Without Zelda showing the way, we might have seen more guided experience that pushed the narrative forward with little room for detours. Players might have felt less rewarding for finding something unexpected. It is a huge part of what makes these open world games so engaging. So at the end of the day, the gaming industry would have moved forward. There's no doubt about that. But without The Legend of Zelda, the industry might have looked a lot different. There's no seamless blend of action, puzzle, and exploration. There's no Ocarina of Time setting the standard for a 3D adventure game. There's no Breath of the Wild pushing the open world design forward. Maybe the gaming industry would have leaned even harder into the shooters and sports games. Maybe fantasy adventure games would have stayed niche instead of mainstream. So that means no Baldur's Gate 3. It's kind of crazy to think about, right? Luckily, we don't have to imagine a world without Zelda because it's here and it's still shaping gaming today. So, what do you think? Let me know in the comments down below, and I'm also curious, what other game, like big game franchise out there do you think would have paved the way or maybe even changed the entire gaming industry? One that comes to mind for me personally is definitely Mario. I believe without Mario, we probably wouldn't have Zelda. And as you know, without Zelda, we wouldn't have all these cool things we have today. So hey, if you guys enjoyed this video, make sure that like button. I would really be appreciated. And if you always want to see more Zelda content like this, hit the subscribe button. It's completely free and you can always change your mind later. So anyways, thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye.